Last video of the year, last video of my 3 D&D characters, saving the best for last, my Halfling Blade Singing Wizard. Although, to be clear, I love them all, and I only say best for last because short recognizes short, and I gotta give my girl a boost. Haha, boost. Just a quick thing for our new friends, this is the final video in this mini-series of rendering what were supposed to be options for my D&D player character, but ended up becoming NPCs in my own D&D universe. If you want a little backstory as to why these 3 in particular, you can check out this video, as well as the 2 follow-up videos about my Hobgoblin Barbarian Ezra and my Yuan-Ti Sorcerer Merilith. That aside, let's jump into the drawing. I was really excited to get into rendering this little halfling. First of all, just because I love her character design, and second of all, her more stout build allowed her to fit super nicely into the canvas size that I typically use. My canvases are sized specifically for Instagram, just because that was where I used to have the biggest art following. This is in fact not the case anymore, because YouTube is now where I have the most people interested in my art and work. I have thought about switching my canvas to be more suitable for YouTube video dimensions, but I kind of like the dimensions and orientation of this particular canvas, and it just works super well for my character designs. One of the things I seem to have a tendency to do while drawing halflings or gnomes or whatnot is that I give them sort of cartoonishly large eyes, and my art style isn't necessarily realistic by any means, so all of my characters' eyes are sort of big for their heads, but I feel like that comes out particularly strongly when I'm depicting the shorter D&D races. But I do resize her eyes a little bit to sort of account for that tendency. Even though I am a pretty short person myself, I do have a hard time drawing a lot of the different body types for halflings and gnomes and similar D&D races. It's definitely something I would love to get better at, but for the time being, it's just a matter of figuring out how to draw gnomish or halfling characters without making them just look like a child. And while not making them have the body type of a child is one way to do that, I think getting the shadows on the face correct is also a great way to depict age. Even with her very round face and her little sort of upturned nose, there are small details that really help to shape her as an adult and not as a child. So I gave her a bump above the bridge of her nose to make it look less like a soft little baby nose, as well as some harsher shading and highlights around the brows and thick dark eyebrows. So while I work on the cloak cowl thing, let's lay down some backstory for this halfling and talk about how she's connected to Merilith and Ezra and Ixerul. First off, her name. I actually went back and forth on this one for a while, but I finally settled on the name Isagwen Nimblepick. It's a little more Tolkien than I usually go for when it comes to fantasy names, but for some reason it suits her. And besides, she's a little bit of a refugee and a deserter, so to most people, she is known by the name Ira. Ira, or Isagwen, is a later addition to Merilith's girl gang, but I'm going to leave the timeline relatively undefined and loose, just to give me some flexibility when I actually get around to DMing my campaign. You see, the campaign book that I'm writing will talk about Isagwen as part of Ixerul and Merilith and Ouroboros, but the reality is she could actually be located in the Western New Empire, depending on how early you set your campaign. If you start the campaign quite a bit before the start of the war, she would have been part of the recent graduates of Illalux, a prestigious university for spellcasters. However, instead of being allowed to continue on to her higher level of research into Elven Invocation, with the continent on the verge of conflict, Isagwen, along with many of the able-bodied people in the West, were drafted in anticipation of a major war. Isagwen's attitude towards the impending war is not particularly patriotic. Although the Illalux University didn't flourish in wealth like the schools on the eastern side of the continent, closer to the heart and eyes of the old empire, there is a certain independence and lack of red tape that can be appreciated from being part of a smaller system. Needless to say, the idea of being absorbed into the tighter control of an empire, new or not, was not particularly appealing to our free-spirited halfling. Through some hushed gossip and a little investigation, Isagwen discovered the city of Ixerul, a relatively new civilization in the neutral territories with a comparably flexible government structure. Besides, there's a rumor going around about a disgraced sorceress from the Ouroboros family who was affected by strange otherworldly powers, who might be in dire need of the services of a magic scholar. So, Isagwen ran. The only family she had at this point were her fellow researchers, and they were all dispersed among different military encampments and training grounds, and she would have no good way of finding them. The journey came with many trials, including being hunted and scryed on by other wizards, but through some skill, some halfling luck, and exhausted past her resources, she eventually made it to the Demogorgon Temple. Obviously, her presence wasn't particularly welcome at first. There was severe interrogation, cruel, bordering on torturous treatment, and lots of having to prove her value to what could possibly be one of the most powerful families in the neutral territories. Until a letter from Basilia came, a city northward within the territories of the old empire Exenir. The letter was from a mysterious group called the Kandor Collective, a group dedicated to digging up the untold history of how the Exenir Empire came to be. They were requesting aid and suggesting a tentative alliance with the Ouroboros clan. Isagwen, being the most expendable asset they had, became their test emissary. After proving her ability to get to and from Basilia as well as being able to negotiate effectively on behalf of Ouroboros, she was accepted and put into direct contact with Marilith. Isagwen would become her messenger to Basilia and eventually exchange more mercenary-style services for anti-scrying materials, freedom to research and experiment, as well as the opportunity to work with Ezra to help Marilith realize and accept her newly bestowed psionic powers. Now, that is pretty much the end of that story, and I hope I can get into the nitty-gritty of the Kandor Collective and all that in the future video. I do have one headcanon though. I mean, I guess it's my world, so if it's my headcanon, it's just regular canon. But anyways, obviously, as a student of the blade-singing ability and a lover of all things research, there is no way that Ira or Isagwen would not be an absolute huge fangirl of the young professor Magda Mackay, the blade-singing gnome, and I imagine Isagwen would spend some time sneaking around Basilia on her emissary missions, looking for Magda just to see and admire her work. And another little detail, Marilith, Ezra, and Isagwen get very close. In fact, the white streak in Isagwen's hair is not natural. It's there because she went out and got part of her hair bleached so that Marilith wouldn't feel so left out with her own hair that had been streaked white during her battle with the Aboleth. Also, I think Marilith's father would end up calling the group Mayhem, May, or M-E-I, for Marilith, Ezra, and Isagwen, and Mayhem just because he had no idea that bringing these three women together would create a new pinnacle of power in Ictharul, certainly a force to be reckoned with, indeed. Actually, speaking of hair, I love her fluffy hair. I will say it was a tiny bit of a pain because of how many small bits there was to take care of, but I really just enjoy skunk hair. Like, doing the money piece highlight is very cute, don't get me wrong, but I love when it's big chunks of white hair like Noodles from The Offspring. One of these days when I feel more confident, and also maybe when I'm less nervous about not needing to look traditional for a formal workplace environment, I would love to do some Cruella de Vil stuff going on up there. But you have to promise to keep this a secret between us, and don't tell my dad, because I love my father dearly, but he probably would not be a huge fan of me wanting the skunk look. I want to talk about her outfit a little bit. It doesn't really match Ezra's in any way, so it's not like the two of them have a uniform for work, right? The original thought was that she might have had a military uniform that she brought over to Ictharul, and that's what this would be. But as I kept drawing, I think most of her outfit is probably just stuff she purchased or made for herself in Ictharul, but the sash around her waist is a remnant of her military uniform, with anti-scrying runes embroidered and enchanted into it. Also, I have absolutely no reason to be proud of it, but I love the way the sleeves on her shirt came out. It just looks very light and flowy, and the texture is perfect for a very elegant blade song dance and increased range of movement. Of all the characters I have drawn, I never really considered making costumes or cosplays of any of them, but boy howdy is Isagwen testing my willpower. The hair might prove to be a challenge, but I can definitely see myself being able to pretty effectively create all the other pieces of the costume. And I'm exactly 5 feet tall, which I know, it's a little tall to be a halfling, but I think I can probably get away with it. Speaking of making costumes, I have a lot planned for the new year. Hopefully a lot more sewing and a lot more costumes, a lot bigger projects, and more work on my campaign book and the world lore. I've got plenty of childhood character redraws to tackle. I got a cool machine for Christmas that cuts vinyls and stuff, so that opens a new wing in cosplay capabilities. And I have a lot planned and a lot I want to try out. And I know my thing is speed paints, and I don't have plans to leave that behind since that's kind of the whole reason that anyone has followed me up to this point. But I hope in 2023 I can do a lot bigger projects and a lot more random hobby things. For example, I really want to learn how to use Blender or a similar software for both animation purposes and to also be able to make little minis of my campaign characters and 3D print them. I would love to do more than one cosplay for the Ren Fair next year, maybe revisit and update my Jester Lavore costume to match the look from the Mighty Nine Reunited series, and my husband has agreed to be a mannequin from time to time, so hopefully I will have some cool clothing or cosplays more suited to a different style than my own to show off someday. I'd also love to try my hand at making some foam or Warbler armor type pieces. Granted, cosplay and costuming gets pretty expensive, so I will have to have at least a little restraint, but I don't know if you all want to watch me like cook or bake or do random things like make dice or work on smaller sewing or crafting projects. But yeah, I'm just really looking forward to all the things I can do next year, and I mean, truly, who knows what the future holds for us. I'm just excited that you're all here for the wild ride. And there I go, finishing up the last of my made up runes on this sash. I think it looks super cool, and also if any of the runes or symbols I made happen to look like an actual language, it really was just a bunch of scribbles. I did not intend to write anything. I didn't do any research ahead of time. And some of you might be like, yeah, of course it's just little scribbles. What else would it be? We'll not talk about the time that I made a very detailed piece of art and how I looked up specific Viking runes and their meanings. And then when I posted the art piece, no one seemed to care for it very much because it was very dramatic and different from the style that I had at the time, but in my opinion, it is probably some of my favorite work that I've done to this day. Moving on to this hand and arm that I have been putting off, but most of all what I have been putting off, the sword. I don't really draw a lot of weaponry, to be honest. I have always enjoyed drawing people and clothes much more than just stationary swords or inanimate objects. I even prefer scenery, but I know some people are like, their whole thing is drawing weapons, but I need you all to bear with me. I'm just branching out here. I really would like to get much better at drawing weapons, and then weapons being used in dynamic poses instead of just standing there. But taking that a step back to just drawing weapons, I will be spending a lot of time making art for individual items in my campaign book for like special items or tokens or whatnot, so no time like the present to get used to drawing these sorts of things. I don't usually depict my character with weapons just because I'm always a little insecure about them. I know nothing about pommel and blade balancing or size in relation to a person's height. Are swords like snowboards where you can get a different size based on height and weight, or is it like you can just have a sword as big as you want as long as you can effectively maneuver it around? I'm not sure, although that sounds like probably a nice midnight rabbit hole of the internet that I will probably venture down in the not so distant future. All I know is sword look cool and Elven Blade Song sword glow green. I really wanted to give Isagwen a pretty sword because obviously that just feels like something a blade singing wizard might be kind of particular about. I'm torn on whether this should be a sword she carried from her days at the university or something gifted to her by Ouroboros. On one hand, it seems very in character for a blade singer to have only one blade, but on the other hand, to have an iconic blade like this would very much be an item that would ping strongly on people's like scrying and locate object spells, so maybe, like the sash she wears, she added some hidden engraved runes or had an enchantment placed on it to prevent it from being located or scryed on by unwanted attention. Either way, I'm really proud of how this sword turned out, even though I know it's a little bit of a cliche in terms of glowing elven sword with cool engravings, but go easy on me. It's a classic look for a reason. It's got a beautiful glassy, glowy look, and it looks equal parts dangerous and magical, and can you just imagine how intense a blade singing fight would look with this sword? It's pretty cool. And with that, here we have our little halfling blade singer, Isagwen Nimblepick. I love her, that's all. She's who I want to be when I grow up. A little bit mad scientist, a little bit artist, super pretty skunk hair, and always working hard to reach her goals. Sure, my goals aren't exactly to escape an army and join a sorcerer mafia, but nobody's perfect. The only thing I'm unsure about with this drawing is the clasps on her little underbust corset. I'm thinking now that I should have made them gold instead of silver. At the time, I thought it would bring a nice continuity from her sword to her outfit, but looking back, I'm just not sure if mixing the gold and silver was a good call. But I guess we can't all be perfectly color-coordinated D&D NPCs, and she looks ready to take on whatever comes her way nonetheless. And with the completion of Isagwen and the end of our little mayhem trio, that brings the videos for 2022 to an end. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and I will hopefully see you next year, alongside me for the adventure that awaits us then. What will next year hold for us? Who knows? Not me.